Story 1. I'm a very introverted person, but, like everyone, I need to make money to live on. After taking a few jobs in retail and failing miserably at each one, I thought I finally found a suitable job for a recluse like myself. I landed a job to be the overnight attendant at a local gas station. It was my first night on the job. I live in a rural area, so the local gas station was never really too busy. The guy on the day shift explained to me that all I had to do was sit in the large glass room, synonymous with gas stations. For those of you who don't know, gas stations usually have large glass areas in which an attendant sits overnight. It's usually locked and might even be bulletproof for obvious security reasons. If a customer came and either bought gas or requested a small snack from the various snacks we had on display, I would accept the cash and hand over the snacks, all from behind the safety of the thick glass. The night started out relatively normally. The first few customers didn't even buy any snacks. They simply filled up their cars, quickly paid, and drove off into the night. It was towards the midpoint of my shift, so I was planning to take a break. I locked up the gas station and began walking towards my car. I opened the door of my 2006 Honda Civic and sat down. I planned to close my eyes for a few minutes before heading back to work. After what had to be less than 1 minute, I heard a very slight cough coming from right behind me. It was so slight that the only reason I was able to hear it was due to how quiet the parking lot was. I sprang up and sprinted out of my car and towards the safety of the gas station. I quickly grabbed the keys from my pocket, unlocked the door, and dove inside. Without a moment's hesitation, I locked the door and took out my phone to call the police. Just as I was about to finish dialing for the police, I heard a knocking coming from the glass door. A large man dressed in all black stood there. His eyes were open so wide that I thought they were going to pop out of his head. He had a large scar below his left eyebrow. He was not smiling or frowning, but simply staring at me. He slowly started lifting something up and pushing it against the glass. It was my driver's license, displaying my home address. I must have dropped my wallet sprinting into the gas station. Now this total psycho knew not only my full name, but also where I lived. The man put my ID back into his pocket and slowly walked away. I quickly called the police and they came to the gas station. They couldn't find any trace of the guy. Needless to say, I spent the next few nights at my parents' house before moving away. I knew I would never be able to sleep at my old apartment, knowing that this guy could show up at any time. Stay safe when working the night shift. Nothing good ever happens after midnight. Story 2. It was a cold fall night. It was one of my first weeks working at the local hospital. My local hospital is spread out over various buildings. I was assigned to one of the smaller buildings, located a few hundred yards away from the main hospital. This building housed some of the hospital's administrative offices, as well as the hospital's morgue. I was the sole security guard on duty assigned to this particular building. My supervisor was working in the main hospital area. Every few hours, I would perform rounds of my building and tell my supervisor via walkie-talkie that everything was clear. It was towards the end of my shift, and I had made my way from the top floor of the building to the basement. I had to go down to the second level of the basement, which housed the hospital's morgue. I know it sounds creepy, but it never really was. There were usually no bodies left in the morgue overnight. Our hospital didn't see too many deathly ill patients. I slowly opened the door to the morgue and glanced around. There was basically nothing in there, just the stereotypical autopsy table and the so-called freezers which housed the bodies. Just as I was about to exit the morgue, I heard a rattling noise coming from a nearby vent. I walked over and shined my flashlight towards it. Suddenly, a large rat pounced out of the vent and fell onto the floor beside me. I screamed and ran out of the morgue. Embarrassed, but glad that I was the only person to hear myself scream like a little girl, I closed the door and returned to the lobby. A few minutes later, I went to grab for my walkie-talkie to let my supervisor know that my building was all clear. I quickly realized that my walkie-talkie wasn't in my pocket. I must have dropped it after being startled in the morgue. I went into my desk drawer and grabbed my spare walkie-talkie. As soon as I turned it on, I heard a loud ruffling noise coming in from another walkie-talkie user. "Hello? Is anyone there?" "Over," I replied, afraid that my supervisor was annoyed that I had yet to update him. Another ruffling noise came through. "Sorry, I can't hear what you're saying." "Over," I replied. I suddenly heard a very soft voice coming through. It said, "Brian, always remember I love you. Keep an eye on Mom and Dad for me, and never forget all the good times." Startled, I dropped the walkie-talkie. The voice sounded exactly like my brother. It sounded like he was very far away, but somehow still very easy to understand. I quickly picked up the walkie-talkie. "Hello? Adam? What's going on?" Despite my pleading, whoever it was never answered me. I went back down to the morgue and found my other walkie-talkie sitting neatly on a table. That night, I got a call from my parents that would change me for the rest of my life. My brother Adam died in a car accident earlier that night. I was never able to explain what happened that night. Was that Adam telling me it was going to be okay? Did the morgue provide me with one last conversation with my beloved brother? I guess we will never know. Story 3. It was my senior year of high school. I was able to land a job as a security guard at a yacht club. Unlike most other jobs for high school kids, it paid a few dollars more than minimum wage, so I was very excited to make some easy money. I started working at the club during the spring, so the first few months went very well. There were usually people around for most of the night, and being near the water during the warmer months was always fun. However, once the autumn began to roll in and the leaves started to fall, the club became more and more empty. It got to the point that I would almost always be the only person there for the majority of my night shifts. One night I was sitting at my post in the security office and staring out at the docks. The security office was made of all glass, and it provided for an incredible view of the premises. As I sat there admiring the water, my cell phone rang. It was coming up as an unknown number, but I figured I should answer it in case it was my boss telling me to do something during my shift. "Hello?" I said. I heard nothing. I waited for a few moments and hung up. A few minutes later, I booted up my laptop and started watching Netflix. Talk about the perks of being a security guard. After getting into an episode of You, my phone began to ring again. "Yeah, what is it?" I mumbled into the phone. Once again, nobody answered. I just heard someone breathing heavily. I was getting both creeped out and very annoyed. "Lose my number, creep," I murmured into the phone before hanging up. I was slightly nervous, but shook it off and once again began watching Netflix. Prank phone calls happened all the time, I thought to myself. Around an hour later, my phone once again began to ring. I picked it up, and before I could even get a word in, a deep voice said, "I want to see what your insides look like. I'm watching you right now." I dropped my phone and slowly glanced out the large window behind me. There was a man in a hockey mask standing on the dock. He was holding a large machete that shined in the light of the moon. I wish I could say that I grabbed the baseball bat that we keep in the security office and beat this guy up. Instead, I ran to one of the rooms on the second floor of the club, locked myself in, and called the police. By the time the police arrived, the man in the mask was gone. But before he left, he slashed my tires and left me a note under my windshield. This note would haunt me for quite some time. On an old napkin, he wrote, "I will see you soon." I quit my job at the yacht club soon after that. Be careful working late at night. And remember, society's worst come out after the sun sets.